Clara thought it was just another quiet morning. The young waitress slid the plate of pancakes in front of the boy. No words, just a soft smile and a whisper. "On the house, sweetheart." He didn't speak. He never did. But outside, tires crunched the gravel. Four black SUVs rolled to a stop like something out of a war film. And then, silence. A man in full military dress stepped out, metals gleaming, a sealed envelope clutched tightly in his hand. Inside the diner, forks froze midair. Every head turned. Who was this soldier? And what did he need with the quiet waitress? No one really knew. Until now. They say some people move through the world like shadows, present but unseen. Clara Jennings was one of them. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., she slipped out of the apartment above Beckett's Hardware in Missoula, Montana, wrapped herself in an oversized coat that had known too many winters, and walked the 6 blocks to Maple and Main Cafe. She never drove, never needed to. The quiet suited her. To the regulars who filtered in, loggers, linemen, nurses coming off night shift, Clara was just the coffee girl, always on time, always polite, never loud. She moved with the kind of silence that made people feel comfortable without asking why she never talked about herself. Nobody asked where she went after hours. Nobody wondered why she always sat alone during her 10-minute break, sipping tea and watching people through the fog glass like she was remembering something she couldn't quite name. But there was one truth no one knew. Clara Jennings had no one. No family. No siblings. No secret fiancé off overseas. Her parents had died in a car crash when she was 17. Her grandfather, a World War II medic who raised her with tough love and softer hands than he'd admit, had passed last spring. Since then, Clara's only companion was a record player and a photo of her mom smiling through a sunbeam at Coney Island in 1986. She didn't complain. She didn't cry. She just kept going. Because that's what quiet people do. Until one October morning, something changed. He walked in just after the lights flickered on. Small frame, too small jacket, a backpack that looked like it belonged to someone twice his size. He didn't say a word, just sat in the farthest booth from the door and stared out the window as if he were trying to memorize the town before it disappeared. When Claire approached, he ordered a glass of water. Not juice, not hot chocolate, just water with a paper straw. He said thank you, but barely. It was less a voice than a whisper, like the sound of something breaking in reverse. The next day he came again. Same time, same booth, same order. By day 3, Clara couldn't stop watching him. The way he cradled the glass. The way his eyes scanned a book he'd clearly read before. The way he left, always at the same time, disappearing into the early light without looking back. She didn't know his name, but something about him felt familiar. Not in the literal sense, but in that strange, aching way you recognize pain when it mirrors your own. And what Clara didn't know, what no one in that cafe could possibly imagine, was that the boy sitting in the corner wasn't just quiet, he was surviving. And before long, that quiet woman with no one to call family would become the most important person in his world. If that pulled at something inside you, don't forget to hit subscribe. This story is only getting started, and trust me, the ending will stay with you long after the screen goes black. Now here's a quick question for you. If you saw a child alone in a cafe, would you? A. Ask them directly if they're okay. B. Quietly offer them something warm. No questions asked? Comment your answer below with A or B. We'd love to hear what you would do. He came again the next morning. Same time, same booth, same silence. Clara had opened the cafe early, as always. The hiss of the coffee machine the only sound until the door creaked open, and that small figure stepped inside like he belonged to the quiet. He moved like someone who didn't want to be seen, but expected to be watched. There was a discipline to it, almost military, though he couldn't have been older than 9. Noah, though Clara didn't know his name yet, slipped into the corner booth as if gravity lived there. He didn't look around, didn't fidget. He opened the same paperback book, its cover softened from too many hands and too few shelves. He ordered water again. This time Clara brought it without asking, placing the glass gently before him with a paper straw, her only greeting a nod. He nodded back. And so it began. A rhythm, unspoken but precise. Each morning he arrived at 6:45, always 6:45. The streets were still dusted with frost. The air bit through jackets. And every time Noah sat in the same booth, read in the same posture, left at exactly 7:28. Clara noticed the little things. How he pressed his back to the booth wall so he could see both the door and the window. How his eyes flicked to the clock every 10 minutes, but he never rushed. How he sipped water like he was stretching it, savoring it, as if slowing down made it last longer. What struck her most was the stillness. Kids fidget, kids talk, kids swing their legs and ask questions and look for approval. But Noah was still, like he'd been trained to wait, like waiting was safer than moving. She didn't ask questions. Something about him warned against it. Not rudely, but carefully. His guard was high, even when his head was bent over the page. So she said nothing, just made sure his water was full and that his table was clean. And she watched. The other customers didn't pay much attention. A lone kid in the morning didn't register in a town where shift workers and farmers passed through on their way to somewhere more urgent. But to Clara, he became the most urgent thing in the room. On the fifth morning, the wind outside had picked up and the cafe's heater lagged behind. Clara noticed him rubbing his fingers together beneath the table, pale and stiff from cold. So she walked back to the kitchen and scooped a bowl of oatmeal. Brown sugar, no raisins. Something told her he wouldn't like raisins. She placed it in front of him with quiet grace. Kitchen made too much, she said softly. Would hate to throw it out. He didn't speak, not right away. But when he picked up the spoon, carefully, as though testing whether the kindness would hold, and took a bite, Clara exhaled. 10 minutes later, the bowl was clean. And as he left, brushing crumbs from the table with the side of his sleeve, he looked up, made brief eye contact, and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make Clara's hand stop shaking. She didn't know who he was or why he came, but she knew now he was hungry, for more than food, and she wasn't going to let that hunger go unanswered. By the end of the second week, Clara knew the boy's schedule better than her own. She knew that he always pushed the salt shaker to the far left corner of the table like a ritual, that he never brought a jacket thick enough for Montana mornings, that he always read for exactly 20 minutes, never looked at the menu, and left without a trace, except the empty glass of water and, sometimes now, an empty bowl. Noah still hadn't told her his name, and Clara still hadn't asked. She didn't need to. There are some truths you come to know not by being told, but by simply paying attention. And Clara had always been a quiet expert at noticing what others ignored. It was on the 12th morning that she made pancakes. She didn't plan to. There wasn't an extra batch. No mistake in the kitchen, just an ache that grew too heavy as she watched him walk in with damp cuffs on his jeans and a stare that had forgotten what it meant to be 10 years old. So she cracked the eggs and poured the batter and added a dash of cinnamon like her grandfather had taught her, as if the gesture alone might change the weight in his eyes. When he sat down, she brought the plate without fanfare. 3 small pancakes, warm and golden, a little butter melting at the center. "The cook messed up the count," she said lightly. "This plate would just go cold." Noah stared at it, unmoving. There was suspicion in his eyes, but not the kind bred from arrogance. This was the suspicion of someone unaccustomed to being offered anything without strings. Clara didn't linger. She simply topped off his water, gave a soft nod, and turned away. It wasn't until she was wiping the counter that she glanced back and saw it, the plate nearly clean, the last bite held gently in his hand like he was reluctant to finish. When he finally did, he placed the fork down with care, like a ritual completed. When Clara returned to clear the plate, he didn't look up, but as she reached for the dish, he whispered, "Best I've ever had." 4 words. She didn't respond. Couldn't. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. From then on, the ritual evolved. Some mornings it was scrambled eggs and toast, cut diagonally like a school lunch. Other days it was a waffle with powdered sugar, shaped like a smiley face she pretended not to have crafted on purpose. She always found a reason for the plate. Another kitchen mistake, a canceled order, an extra portion. He never questioned it. And each time she watched his posture shift, just slightly, shoulders softening, breasts lengthening, the ever-watchful glance over his shoulder becoming less frequent. She still didn't know his name, still didn't know where he came from or where he went after he left. But every morning, when he stepped through the door and looked for that booth in the corner, something in Clara stood a little straighter. Because in a world where people so often walk past the wounded, she had chosen to stop. And somehow, in the silence between the fork and the plate, they had become something that resembled family, even if neither of them would ever call it that out loud. At first, no one said anything. The regulars at Maple and Main had their routines, their blind spots. People came for eggs and hash browns, not human mysteries. But in a small town like Missoula, silence never lasts long, especially when it's filled with curiosity. Clara had been careful. The plates were always placed with casual ease, the food offered as though it came from accidents, kitchen miscounts, or random generosity. But patterns speak, and people notice things they're not supposed to. "Hey, Clara," said Marvin, a retired accountant who always sat by the window. "That kid your nephew or something? He sure gets the royal treatment." Clara had only smiled, wiped her hands on her apron, and moved on. But the comments came more frequently after that. "He never pays," Lorraine muttered to another customer as Clara walked past. "Can't be good for business." "He's there every morning," a teenage waitress whispered during a break. "We're not a daycare." Clara didn't respond. Not because she didn't have words, but because none of the words would change their minds. People who measure kindness with receipts rarely understand those who give without asking. Still, it wore on her. Not their opinions, but the weight of carrying something fragile in a world that treated vulnerability like a stain. Then came the morning Mara, the manager, asked to speak with her in the back office. The space smelled like stale grease and cleaning chemicals, and the chair wobbled as Clara sat down across from her. Mara leaned forward, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "I've been getting questions," she began, her tone sharp, clipped. "About the boy." Clara said nothing. "I know what you're doing. I've watched. And look, I get it. I do. But this is a business. We can't just give food away. It sets a precedent." Clara reached for her apron pocket and unfolded a crumpled envelope. Inside was a stack of tips, small bills, mostly ones and fives. She placed it gently on the desk. "I've been paying," she said quietly. "Every day." Mara blinked. "From your own money?" Clara nodded. "I can afford one meal. It's not much." Mara sighed, long and heavy, as if wrestling between policy and conscience. After a pause, she pushed the envelope back toward Clara. "Just keep it discreet. I don't want this turning into a charity operation." "I never meant it to," Clara replied. "I just didn't want him to feel invisible." The truce was tense but held. But outside the walls of the cafe, the story started to twist. One morning, a photo showed up online. Someone had snapped a shot of the empty booth with a plate and posted it to a local Facebook group, captioned, "Feeding ghosts? Or just freeloaders? Welcome to Missoula's newest charity cafe." The comments were cruel, sharper than Clara expected. "Publicity stunt. Another bleeding heart waitress looking for attention. Bet he's not even homeless, just playing the system." Clara didn't answer them. She didn't need to. Because every morning at exactly 6:45, Noah still walked in. And every morning she had a plate waiting, without apology, without excuse. Not because he deserved it, but because no one should have to earn the right to be seen. On the 22nd morning, the booth was empty. Clara stood behind the counter, refilling the sugar caddies with quiet hands. But her eyes kept drifting to the far corner where Noah always sat. The plate she had prepared, a small stack of pancakes and a half-sliced banana, sat on the warmer, untouched. She waited. By 7:45, she slid the plate onto the table anyway. She told herself it was a force of habit, that maybe he'd just overslept or missed the bus. But her heart was already trying to brace for something it couldn't name. The next day, he didn't come either, nor the one after that. Each morning, Clara placed a plate at the booth and watched it go cold. She wrapped the food in wax paper at the end of each shift and took it home, tucking it into the freezer like memory could be preserved in layers of foil and frost. And still, the booth remained empty. People noticed. Lorraine stopped muttering. Marvin stopped asking questions. Even Mara walked with softer steps. But Clara didn't explain, and no one pressed her. 10 days passed. The photo online hadn't gone away. If anything, it had taken on a second life. Shared, screenshotted, twisted by strangers who didn't know her name, but were quick to pass judgment. Imaginary charity case. She's probably making it up. Feeding phantoms for sympathy. Clara didn't respond. Not because she wasn't hurt, but because pain had no place in her hands when they were already full of memories. On the 11th day, she opened her grandfather's cigar box. It had been tucked on the top shelf of her closet since he passed. A little wooden chest that once held war medals, faded love letters, and the soft scent of old cedar. Inside, beneath a ration book and a service patch, was a folded note in his careful block handwriting. Clara, it read, you'll be tempted one day to give up on people. When the world tells you you're foolish for caring, remember this. I once gave my last biscuit to a boy in Italy. My sergeant said it was a waste. That kindness wouldn't keep us alive, but I think it did, because it reminded me what we were fighting for. She read it 3 times that night, her fingers brushing the corner like it was a thread to something steady. Noah's absence wasn't just noticeable. It was a silence that echoed. Clara had known very little about him, not where he came from, not what street he lived on, not even his last name. But grief doesn't require context. It just arrives and it stays. On the 12th morning, she stopped preparing a plate, but she still looked toward the booth every single day. It wasn't until the 15th morning that she found it, tucked between the seat cushion and the wooden frame, barely visible, folded once into a tight square. A bookmark, frayed edges, bent spine, a faded image of stars and constellations barely legible anymore. And on the back, scrawled in pencil, "Thank you, CJ." No signature, but Clara's breath caught, because somehow those 3 words told her everything she needed to know. He hadn't forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, he was still out there, remembering someone who didn't ask questions, only made sure the pancakes were warm. The booth had remained empty for 17 mornings. By now, Clara had stopped bringing out plates for Noah, but she hadn't stopped waiting. The habit was too deeply carved, an internal clock that ticked towards 6:45 with quiet desperation. Each day she found her eyes drawn to the booth in the corner, half hoping for movement, a shadow, the flash of a worn backpack across the window pane. But that morning, on a gray Tuesday that began like every other, everything changed. It started with the sudden stillness that swept across Maple and Main Cafe just after 9 a.m., as though the air itself had paused. Marvin, halfway through a joke, fell silent mid-sentence. Lorraine's coffee cup hovered in her hand, untouched. Outside, tires crunched against gravel, slow and deliberate. 4 black SUVs with government plates pulled into the small parking lot, engines rumbling like distant thunder. They moved with precision, no honking, no hesitation, forming a half circle in front of the cafe's modest glass entrance. The vehicles were spotless, tinted windows, authority wrapped in steel. Doors opened in tandem. Men in military dress uniforms stepped out 3 from each vehicle, flanking one central figure as he emerged from the front SUV. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a posture that didn't bend, and a face weathered not just by time, but by something older grief maybe. His chest bore rows of ribbons and medals heavy with meaning. He didn't look around. He didn't need to. He walked straight toward the door. The bell above the cafe's entrance rang once startling in the silence. Clara was refilling a syrup dispenser when she looked up. Her body froze. The officer removed his cap with practiced grace, eyes scanning the room before settling on her. "I'm looking for a Miss Clara Jennings." He said, his voice steady but softened by reverence. Every gaze in the room turned toward her. Clara nodded slowly, setting the dispenser down, her hands already trembling. "I'm Clara," she said. The officer approached with calm purpose, stopping just a foot away from her. He extended a white envelope, crisp sealed, embossed with the insignia of the United States Army. "My name is Colonel Robert Hale. I've come here on behalf of Staff Sergeant Marcus Green, 10th Special Forces Group, and on behalf of his son." Clara's breath caught in her throat. The envelope trembled as it met her hand. "You've been feeding his boy," the colonel said gently. "Noah." The name landed like a stone in still water. Clara hadn't spoken it aloud, hadn't dared to give it voice. but hearing it now spoken by someone who knew undid something in her. He's safe now, Hale continued. But there's more you need to know. He paused, the room hushed around them. Sergeant Green left a final request. And you, ma'am, are the reason I'm standing here today. And just like that, Clara's quiet world unraveled, her small corner of pancakes and paper straws, colliding with the full weight of a soldier's last wish. She had never asked Noah where he came from. She had never needed to. But now she was about to find out exactly who he was, and why a man who had never met her had made her part of his dying words. Clara sat in the corner booth where Noah once read quietly each morning, the envelope now resting on the table like something sacred. Colonel Hale remained standing beside her, his voice low but steady, as if each word had been chosen with the care of a man delivering more than just news. He was delivering memory. Noah's full name is Noah Green, he began. He's 9 years old. His father's staff sergeant Marcus Green served under my command in the 10th Special Forces Group. Marcus was one of the most disciplined, capable men I've ever had the honor of leading. But more than that, he was a father who never stopped thinking about his son, even when bullets were flying overhead. Clara said nothing. She couldn't. Her fingers traced the seal on the envelope, but her gaze stayed on the colonel, holding on to every word like a thread, keeping her upright. When Marcus was deployed, his wife Noah's mother left. No warning, no explanation. She just walked out. We didn't know. No one did. She didn't inform family, didn't leave a contact. She left that boy to fend for himself. Clara's heart clenched. The memory of Noah's quietness, the way he guarded every glance, every bite, every second of safety, it all made sense now. Noah never told his teachers. He never asked for help. He was afraid that if anyone found out, he'd be taken from his home, from the only connection he had left to his father. So he survived the only way he could. The colonel looked toward the front window for a moment, gathering something in his chest before continuing. He rationed the emergency cash his father left behind, barely enough to cover food. He stretched it, skipped meals, slept with the lights off. But he still showed up to school, still kept his father's routines. And then he found this place. His eyes settled back on Clara. He found you. The words fell between them, heavy and holy. He wrote to his dad about you, said you never made him feel ashamed. Said you fed him without asking why. Said you made the mornings feel less cold. Clara's eyes blurred. She blinked rapidly, but the tears came anyway. Marcus read those letters in the field. Said they were the only thing that gave him peace in the middle of chaos. He told me, if I don't come home, you find her. You find the woman in Missoula who gave my boy back a piece of his dignity. Colonel Hale nodded to the envelope. That letter inside was written by Marcus himself, his final words. He made us promise to deliver it if anything happened. He wanted you to know that you didn't just feed a child. You steadied a soldier. Clara finally looked down at the envelope again. She hadn't even opened it, but it already felt like the most important thing she'd ever held. For months she had asked nothing of a child who had nothing to give. Now she was learning that even in silence, kindness speaks. And in this case, it had spoken across oceans, through battlefields, and beyond life itself. Clara didn't open the letter right away. She held it in her lap like it might shatter under pressure, like it contained more than words, like it carried the echo of a man she would never meet, but somehow already knew. Around her, the cafe had gone quiet again. Customers lowered their eyes. Conversations faded. Even the hum of the kitchen felt distant, like the world itself had paused to give this moment space to breathe. Colonel Hale remained standing at her side, his voice softer now, as if the weight he carried had been lifted just slightly through the telling. We read it at his memorial, he said. Every member of our unit heard his words. We don't usually do that, share something so personal. But this wasn't just a soldier's letter. It was a father's plea. He looked down at Clara, and something in his eyes, toughened by combat, softened by grief, made her finally find the strength to break the seal. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. The kind of script that came from someone who took care with everything, even their pain. Clara, if this letter reaches you, it means I didn't make it home. That's not how I wanted this to go. I had planned so many of them. I wanted to be the one to tell you thank you, face to face. I wanted to sit in that booth and eat your pancakes and shake your hand with both of mine. But if I didn't make it, then I hope this still finds you. You didn't know my son. Not really, but You gave him something I couldn't. When the world got too heavy, when I was 1,000 miles away in a country that felt like the edge of everything, he still had a morning to look forward to. Because of you. He wrote me letters about the diner lady who never asked questions, about warm plates and quiet smiles, and how somehow you made him feel like he belonged without ever asking why he didn't. I want you to know you didn't just feed a child. You gave a soldier peace. You gave a father a measure of comfort knowing his boy wasn't invisible. That matters. That's everything. Please don't ever think of what you did as small. There's no such thing as small kindness. Marcus Green. When Clara looked up, her face was wet. She hadn't even realized she was crying. Colonel Hale remained quiet, allowing her the space to absorb it all. That letter traveled halfway across the world, he said finally, folded in Marcus's breast pocket, protected through sandstorms and firefights. And when we found it, it was still sealed, like he knew it would matter most, unopened, waiting for the right hands. Clara folded the letter again slowly, reverently pressing her fingertips to the crease. Thank you, she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was thanking. Marcus for seeing her, Noah for trusting her, or perhaps the universe for letting her part in their story find its way back to her. Outside, the soldiers stood silently by their vehicles. No sirens, no flags, just stillness. And then Colonel Hale stepped back, drew to attention, and saluted. It wasn't a show, it was a recognition. A soldier honoring a woman whose quiet acts of kindness had crossed oceans, crossed grief, and made their way into the final chapter of a man's life. The days following Colonel Hale's visit passed like ripples on still water, small shifts in the town's usual rhythm, subtle but undeniable. Missoula had always been a quiet place, the kind where life unfolded gently. But after that morning at Maple and Main Cafe, something had changed, not in noise, but in weight. Clara returned to work the next day with a new kind of silence. Not the empty kind she had carried for years, but one filled with something steady and sacred. People noticed. They didn't say much at first, but they lingered a little longer at their tables. They looked at her differently, not with curiosity, but with respect. A soft, human kind. News traveled fast in towns like this. People didn't need headlines. They had front porches and checkout lines and church steps. By the end of the week, nearly everyone had heard the story: the quiet waitress, the invisible boy, the soldiers who arrived not to deliver tragedy, but gratitude. Noah's booth became something more than a table. It became a symbol. Veterans started requesting to sit there. Parents brought their children and whispered the story as they passed by. Some left handwritten notes tucked into the napkin holder, words like, "Thank you for seeing him, and you reminded me of my own son." Mara, who once warned Clara to keep things discreet, now moved with a quiet kind of grace. One afternoon, she handed Clara a small wooden plaque wrapped in brown paper. "I had this made," she said without fanfare. "Thought it belonged there." Clara opened it gently. The plaque was simple, but the engraving was not. "Reserved for those who serve and the families who wait." They mounted it on the wall just above the booth, beneath the soft glow of the overhead light. And though no one announced it, the table was never left empty again. A young woman in navy fatigues came through town on her way to Spokane and left behind her division patch. A grandfather visiting from Iowa left a silver dollar tucked into the menu holder. Even Cody, who rarely said more than 3 words in a row, started slipping Clara an extra biscuit in the mornings, with a quiet nod, no explanation. The Facebook post that had once mocked her now became its own kind of redemption. Someone rewrote the story, this time with truth, and within hours it had been shared hundreds of times. People from out of state commented, former soldiers, single mothers, teachers, strangers who had once been hungry. Clara read the comments late one night, sitting by her kitchen window, the framed letter from Marcus Green resting against a potted fern. She didn't reply to any of them. She didn't need to. What she had done hadn't been for attention. It had been for the boy who didn't ask and for the man who never returned. But now something quiet had taken root in her town, something stronger than any sermon or speech. It was the understanding that small kindness does not disappear. It echoes. Sometimes across a cafe, sometimes across a country, and sometimes it echoes right back into the heart of the person who gave it away. It arrived in early spring, tucked inside a plain manila envelope that bore no return address, just her name written in neat, blocky handwriting, Miss Clara Jennings. The kind of envelope that looked ordinary until you held it. And then it felt like it carried the weight of something unfinished. Mara handed it to her between shifts, her brows raised in quiet curiosity. But Clara didn't open it right away. She waited until the evening when the cafe had emptied out, and the hum of the dishwasher was the only sound in the building. She sat alone in the corner booth, Noah's booth, and carefully peeled back the seal. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, folded once the creases, sharp and deliberate. The handwriting was smaller now, careful and methodical, like each word had been practiced. Dear Miss Clara, I didn't know your name before the day the soldiers came, but I knew your face every morning. You never looked at me like I was a problem. You looked at me like I was just a kid. You always brought the food like it was an accident. Like maybe it didn't matter if I couldn't say thank you out loud. But I always meant to. I just didn't know how. My dad used to say heroes don't wear capes. He wore a uniform, so I thought that was the only kind. But I think sometimes heroes wear aprons too, and they bring pancakes without asking why someone's alone. I live in Asheville now with my grandparents. They're nice. Grandma bakes cookies and Grandpa is teaching me how to fish. Sometimes it's quiet here too, but not in the same way. It's better now. I miss Dad. I miss him every day. But sometimes I miss your diner too. I miss how it smelled in the morning. And I miss how you never made me feel like I owed you an explanation. Thank you for not asking questions when I didn't have the answers. Thank you for making me feel full even when everything else felt empty. Your friend Noah Green P.S. I finished the book. It had a happy ending after all. Clara stared at the page long after she finished reading it, as if the words might shift and deepen with time. She ran her fingertips over the writing, each stroke a small echo of the boy who once sat quietly at her table, guarding his silence like it was armor. She framed the letter, but not in the front of the cafe where everyone could see it. She placed it behind the counter, tucked between a jar of pens and the rotating pie list, a place where only she could glance at it on the quiet days when she wondered if what she did still mattered. Customers asked about the letter sometimes. She'd just smile and say, "It's from someone who reminded me why I do this." But in truth, the letter reminded her of something far more important, that there are moments in life when you don't get to see the impact you've made, when kindness goes unanswered, unnoticed, or even ridiculed. And then sometimes when you least expect it, the echo returns, and it says thank you. Not with fanfare, but with words written by a child who once sat hungry and left believing that the world might still hold a little hope. Spring had finally arrived in Missoula. The snowmelt ran along the curbs like soft-spoken streams, and the air carried the faint scent of thawed pine and morning earth. At Maple and Main Cafe, the light fell longer across the tabletops, and people lingered a little more over their coffee, as if time had softened too. Clara still came in early, still tied her apron the same way, still turned the chairs down from the tables with quiet grace. But something in her had shifted, not dramatically, but deeply, like the roots of a tree settling further into the soil. She moved with purpose, now not routine, with peace, not just habit. On a morning like any other, Clara arrived to find something small and metallic left at her station behind the counter. It wasn't marked, no note, just sitting there beside her order pad, as if placed with care by a hand that didn't need to be seen. She picked it up. It was a challenge coin, thick, weighty, etched with the insignia of the 10th Special Forces Group on one side. On the other, a custom engraving, Semper Memor, always remembering. Clara held it for a long moment, heart-still eyes scanning the cafe, as if some part of her expected to see a uniform at one of the tables. But no one out of place sat there that morning. Just the regulars. Just the ordinary rhythm of life. She slipped the coin into her pocket, not like a keepsake, but like something earned. That evening, as she was untying her apron and wiping down the front counter, she noticed Mara standing at the cafe window, smoothing something into place with blue painter's tape. It was a new sign, simple, quiet, just white lettering on navy. Whoever you are, whatever you can pay, no one leaves hungry. Clara stepped closer. Mara didn't look at her, just kept pressing the edges of the sign flat with practiced hands. "You did this," Mara said after a moment, "whether you meant to or not." Clara didn't answer. She just watched the words settle into the glass, soft and permanent. That night, she walked home under a sky turning lilac and gold, the challenge coin resting warm in her coat pocket. The streets were familiar, unchanged. But Clara felt a quiet charge beneath her feet, as if every sidewalk crack and cafe step had somehow been rewritten by what had unfolded. She thought of Noah, of his quiet footsteps, his book, his whispered thank you. She thought of Marcus Green, and the words folded in a letter that had traveled further than most dreams ever dared. And then she thought of all the others, those she'd never meet, who might one day sit at that booth in the corner and feel maybe for the first time in a long time that they weren't invisible. Clara didn't need recognition. She didn't need applause. She only needed to know that someone somewhere wouldn't go hungry, not just for food, but for dignity, for warmth, for the unspoken reassurance that even in a world that often forgets, kindness remembers. And in that she had found her ending. Not one with noise or fanfare, but one with quiet, steady grace. The kind of ending that makes you believe again. In a small Montana town inside a humble diner, with fogged windows and the scent of fresh coffee, a quiet woman named Clara Jennings lived a life so unassuming that most people never looked twice. She worked the morning shift at Maple and Main Cafe, poured coffee with a gentle hand, and carried her past like an old photograph, tucked into her apron pocket, faded, private, never shared. But everything changed the morning a small, silent boy sat alone in the far corner booth. He never asked for food, only a glass of water and a place to read. His name was Noah Green, though Clara wouldn't know that until much later. What she did know from the moment she laid eyes on him was that he was hungry, not just for breakfast, but for safety, for quiet, for someone to notice that he existed. She began to leave him plates, kitchen mistakes, she'd say, and he accepted them wordlessly. Day after day, bite after bite, their silent ritual became an anchor for both of them. He never asked for help, and she never asked for explanations. When Noah stopped coming, Clara feared the worst. But what arrived in his place was beyond anything she imagined. 4 black SUVs, a decorated Army colonel, and a letter from a fallen soldier staff sergeant, Marcus Green, Noah's father. In his final words, Marcus thanked the woman who had fed his son without question, without judgment. Clara's quiet kindness had not only nourished a lonely child, it had given peace to a man facing death, knowing his boy had not been forgotten. What followed was a wave of recognition, not from the press or the spotlight, but from the hearts of strangers who had once walked invisible paths. Veterans left unit patches at Noah's booth. A plaque was mounted. A letter arrived from Noah, now safe with his grandparents, calling Clara a hero without a cape. And then a challenge coin. A final, silent salute. In a world obsessed with big gestures, Clara's story reminds us that the most powerful kind of kindness is the kind that expects nothing in return, the kind that stays, the kind that listens without asking, the kind that changes lives in quiet, permanent ways. So what's the lesson? Never underestimate the impact of your smallest actions. A plate of food, a warm glance, a question never asked, these can become lifelines. In today's fast-paced world where everyone is busy and digital noise drowns human need, there is revolutionary power in simply seeing someone and choosing to care. Now here's your question. If you had been in Clara's place, what would you have done? A. Ignored the boy and assumed someone else would step in. B. Quietly helped him, even if it meant using your own money. Comment below with A or B, your answer matters. And we'd love to hear from you. What do you take away from Clara's story? How would you apply this kind of kindness in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments. Someone reading may need to hear your perspective. If this story touched something in you, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that remind the world what quiet courage and unseen compassion really look like. Until next time, stay kind, stay human, and keep remembering those who remember others.